Hello and welcome to this Institute for Government event on the Civil Service Fast Stream, flagship talent development programme and an important route for recruitment into the civil service. My name is Alex Thomas, I'm a programme director here at the IFG, and I'm joined also by my colleague Theodore Grammer, who's the author of our recent report on the Fast Stream, which, first plug of many, is available on our website and will help inform the discussion that we're having today. Fast Stream has a long history and has changed a lot over the years. It's also fair to say that in many ways it's in pretty good health. It's got a record number of applications and it's reclaimed the top spot in the Times Higher Education Graduate Scheme ranking. Our research, Theodore's research though, shows that to continue to build and maintain its reputation and quality, there are challenges that the scheme needs to address. Particularly variable quality of postings, early exits from the scheme, and keeping focus on finding and developing talent for the civil service all still need attention. And we've got a fantastic panel to talk about the role of the Fast Stream, how the civil service can learn from other sectors, and how the Fast Stream can continue to do more to deliver for successive governments. So as well as Theodore, who will say a bit more about our report in a moment, we've got Rachel Hopcroft to my left, who's the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at NatWest Group. Before that, she was Corporate Affairs Director at KPMG, and before that, she was a senior civil servant with the misfortune of sometimes having to work with me. Sorry, Rachel. Sonia Pawson on the screen, joining us remotely, is the Director of HR at the West Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service, and before that she had various roles in the civil service, including as head of the Fast Stream. Thank you, Sonia, very much for joining us and beaming in. And to my right, Robert Eagleton is the National Officer for the Fast Stream at the FDA Union, which is the official union for fast streamers. Before we get going, a first call for questions. Get thinking in the room here, and for those tuning in online, use the Slido function on your screens. And when you ask a question, if you can say who you are and what organisation you're from, that would be great. And if you see a question that's similar to one you want to answer, uprate it on Slido so I can see the popular ones and we'll try and ask them. But first, over to Theodore, who will run us through the findings of our research.
Great. Thanks, Alex. So I thought I would just kickstart this conversation by talking a little bit about some of the things that we've been finding out through our research that we carried out earlier this year around the civil service Fast Stream. Part of it is based on data that is publicly available, Fast Stream recruitment data. Part of it is based on sort of exclusive research that we carried out, including a survey of almost 600 current and former Fast Streamers, as well as applicants and prospective applicants, as well as a series of focus groups. So we're going to start with some data on application numbers, which is generally speaking the main indicator that we use to sort of gauge interest in the Fast Stream. I think there are a couple of stories in this chart here. One is, broadly speaking, there was some level of relative stability in terms of interest in the Fast Stream until the mid-2010s, so looking at back at 1999, which is when we get the first data in the space. And then there was more interest that started that was attracted by the Fast Stream about mid-2010s, which coincided with some of the reforms that happened, and which we might get to talk in a little bit, in the early 2010s under Cabinet Office Minister Francis Maude. There's sort of that rise in applications that goes up until 2020, which is this initial peak, which is followed then by a substantial decline by over 50% by 2023. We think that this is probably a combination of different factors, including some general trends in the post-pandemic graduate job market, but also related to the decision in 2022 by Boris Johnson to pause recruitment to the Fast Stream, later reversed, but then also some things related to pay and how it got eroded in the early 2020s. There's then a reversal of fortunes, which we've seen in the last two application cycles, with the highest ever number of applications recorded in 2025. So the cycle with the Fast Streamer starting just this fall of over 70,000 applications. We think that this probably has something to do with the pay deal, which we might get to talk a little bit about later, but also potentially something to do with the use of AI in recruitment. Moving on to the actual size of the Fast Stream intakes. Again, we see some kind of relative stability since like the late 1990s and until the early to mid 2010s, when again there's a boom in activity when it comes to the kind of outreach that is done by the civil service around the Fast Stream, and that coincides with sort of more places, more Fast Streamers being recruited in the first place. The number of Fast Streamers balloons up until until 2018, when we get over 1,400 FOSS streamers in that particular intake. And then it starts to drop, and we get to the current situation in 2025, when we have about slightly over 700 people who got recommended for appointment to the FOSS stream, and this being sort of the lowest number in about 10 years. So there seems to be a partial reversal of that trend in terms of booming sort of FOSS stream intake sizes. This other chart, actually table, probably more accurately, looks at the breakdown of success rates by different kinds of demographic characteristics. So the combination between booming number of applications in 2025 and then sort of a reduced size in the intake has meant that we have the lowest success rate on record for the FOSS stream, which is 1%. Looking at how that breaks down by different socio-demographic indicators, broadly speaking, the various sort of gaps between them are lower than they used to be. So there's been sort of a tendency for those success rates to become more and more equivalent across various socio-demographic characteristics. The one outlier, as you can probably see here, is university background. So this is university of first degree. So again, the sort of benchmark is 1%. We have 4.7% success rate for Oxbridge applicants and 0.4% for non-Russell group applicants, and then 1.9% for Russell group applicants. So that's sort of the big variation that we see there in terms of socio-demographic characteristics. The next thing that I think is worth mentioning, and I think we're probably going to touch more on this, is how FOSS stream pay compared to pay in general in the civil service has changed over time. The blue bars there look at pay over time, so since 2022 and until 2025, for SEO and HEO, so those two grades are combined in terms of the reporting that the Cabinet Office does for pay. So we see that sort of steadily increasing over time. The pink bars there are look at pay for FOSS streamers in their first year when they are at HEO grade level equivalent, again increasing sort of quite consistently since 2022-23 to 2025-26, but sort of substantially lower than that initial whole of civil service benchmark. And then the purple bars there look at FOSS streamers in their fourth year when they're SEO grade level equivalent, and still they sort of are below the SEO HEO sort of grade level average in terms of pay. I'm sure we'll get the chance to talk a little bit more about this later. The final thing I just want to briefly sort of look at is some of the findings that have come out of the research that we did. So that survey that I mentioned, as well as the focus groups. And there are just 4 things that I think are worth mentioning here. The first one is we've identified a quite big sort of challenge for the FOSS stream in terms of early exits. So out of 237 former FOSS streamers who filled out our survey, 41% of them told us that they had left the scheme before it finished. Granted, most of them did leave for other civil service roles rather than for the private sector, and I'm sure we'll get to chat about that in a second. There are some questions that raises about how appealing the scheme really is in terms of people following through on the program. The other things that are worth mentioning, so again, sort of going back to pay, a majority of former and current FOSS streamer survey respondents expressed dissatisfaction with pay and benefits on the FOSS stream. So this is 63 to 60% respectively. This is quite similar to the data that comes out of the Civil Service People survey in terms of dissatisfaction with pay. And this is also similar to sort of the wider civil service. It's one of the areas where there's a big discrepancy as opposed to the levels of satisfaction that are expressed towards other things, other aspects of people's careers and jobs, including learning and development, line management. They generally tend to express much more satisfaction than on pay. In particular, when it comes to pay, a lot of FOSS streamers talk about that discrepancy between their pay and the pay for civil servants in mainstream roles, which we saw on that last slide. 2 more things, very briefly. One on relocation. The prospect of having to relocate, being forced to relocate to a place in the country that they don't know was sort of a big concern for a lot of FOSS streamers when they were applying. When they got on the scheme, it ended up being less of a concern, and it turned out that they often didn't have to move, but it's something that definitely looms large in the minds of applicants. Finally, posting quality. We briefly mentioned this already, but the highly variable quality of postings was raised as one of the big challenges to the scheme by our focus groups participants, generally saying that some jobs are quite stretching and they offer you the kind of opportunity for development that you would expect on the fast stream, but some others not really, and there's very little control that fast streamers feel over their ability to sort of pick and choose their jobs, given that they are posted in various places. I think that should be enough initial food for thought, so I'm going to hand back to Alex.
Thank you, Theodore. Plenty of food for thought, and I should say there's lots more as well in the report. So I promised you more plugs for it. This is the second of more plugs. Sonia, I was going to come to you first and sort of ask about whether, what we had just heard from Theodore and the findings of the report, do they match your experience from when you were head of the fast stream? But I'm also particularly interested in a point Theodore didn't actually make there, but a key finding of the report was about the sort of purpose of the fast stream. Should it be the kind of direct route for a chunk of the top of the civil service? One of our conclusions was that focus on kind of talent and development had been a bit diluted through Brexit and COVID in terms of just sort of needing to get more people in, a focus on functions and professions and specialisation. What should the fast stream be for, I suppose, the question, but your general reflections. Sonia?
Yes, thanks. And thanks, Theodore. So in terms, first of all, to the first part of the question, do the findings of the report square with my experience? So I was head of Fast Stream 2020 to 2024 and responsible for the Fast Stream 2024 reform programme. So back in 2020, we did identify a need to improve the effectiveness and the efficiency of the Fast Stream. But noting, I guess, as has already been noted, it wasn't because the Fast Stream was broken. It was a recognition of a rapidly changing civil service and workforce. So we did set about building the case for change. And what I can say is that the findings presented just now do read across strongly to our original review and the original problem statements that underpin the transformation work. So in a nutshell, we identified that the purpose had become ambiguous, both in terms of strategic intent of the scheme and the size. There was a real conflict, I guess, in terms of whether the scheme and the Fast Stream is to develop technical expertise or generalist skills. And we could talk about the generalist scheme, but we'll not deviate there. Basically trying to serve too many needs. And then finally, there was a compromise or an erosion of the learning and development offer. So we really wanted to give a more rigorous prescribed offer. And then finally, the delivery model for the Fast Stream had become unwieldy. So lots of parallels. Similarly, there was, we found pay and benefits to be an issue, attrition, and of course, relocation. So what I can say is that the 2024 reform model is now in progress. And so I guess even though there are those parallels, I think it would be fair to say the Fast Stream team are working on lots of those issues that I've identified, but there has to be time given for those changes to be embedded. And I think it's fair to say that 2024 intake cohort will be the first Fast Streamers experiencing that new offer and new delivery model. And we talk about purpose and the vision. I mean, what was clear when I was head of the Fast Stream is that we wanted to continue to have an offer and a programme that rivaled the best graduate schemes in the UK. So it's nice to see a return to the number one spot. But it also needed to be, I guess, from a strategic angle, a HR angle, reflective of the civil service workforce requirements and enable basically government to deliver better outcomes. So whilst we recognise the need for a refreshed offer, it needed to also meet the needs of the workforce. And lots of our research in terms of benchmarking across other organisations did show that we stacked up in terms of size of intake and size of team delivering and so on. But in terms of purpose, we thought about that a lot. Historically, it was very much badged as a pipeline to the senior civil service, but in reality, our research told us that lots of applicants had never even heard of the senior civil service, weren't thinking about long-term career aspirations. So just bringing it back to let's be really clear about the purpose to all stakeholders, actually, including applicants. We presented that in principle, the fast stream remains part of a strategic capability pipeline to the SCS. So really is part of that coherent talent management offer. But it would be marketed both internally and externally as a leadership and management development programme, serving all of the functions and professions across government, but with the aim of developing individuals to take on that middle manager role at grade 7, but with a kind of more implicit acknowledgement that this could be a pipeline to much more senior leadership roles.
Thanks, Sonia. That's really interesting. What would you're absolutely right to draw attention to the kind of 2024 and run up to that changes in the scheme, and we reflect on that quite a lot. I'd be interested in what are your tests for success of that? What will you be looking for over the next couple of years to show that those reforms have either worked or not worked?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. First of all, feedback, vast stream of feedback in terms of experience. So there is an annual mechanism, an annual fast stream of survey. I would be expecting satisfaction with the scheme to go up, satisfaction with the quality of both the training, learning and development offer, as I know in terms of the Times Top 100 research and what graduates look for in employers, that stacks up high. Also increased satisfaction in terms of the total reward package and pay and benefits. But ultimately, perhaps one measure of success would be reduced attrition from the scheme. And I know your research shows the high levels of fast streamers leaving. Yes, it is true that most in the main stayed in the civil service at large, but we would look for a measure of success for more a greater proportion of fast streamers reaching that endpoint assessment and graduation.
Brilliant, thank you. And there you go, fast streamers. The test of success is in your hands about feedback and jobs. Rachel, the interesting thing about your experience is you know the civil service really, really well, but you've also spent the last part of your career in two sort of civil service comparable, if I can put it that way, private sector organisations. So what does the private sector get right compared to your experience in the civil service?
Thank you, Alex. And hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here. I think before I say what I think the private sector gets right, I think there's always a tendency for the civil service to look at the private sector and think it's done so much better elsewhere. And one of my sort of early experiences when I first joined KPMG was how prized the civil service fast stream was as a graduate scheme in and of itself. And some of the people that we would be looking to take into KPMG, if they had done the civil service fast stream, were seen as having gone through, if you like, an elite graduate scheme, and therefore there was currency for having done that in and of itself. But that's not to say there aren't problems with it, and it's illuminating to see the researches that Theodore's done. So in my experience of the private sector, what does it do right? I guess I've worked in two organisations now that are really big graduate employers. So to put some context to that, KPMG, one of the big four accounting firms, is an organisation in the UK of about 22,000 people, and it takes around 1,000 graduates a year. So pretty high number. And now at NatWest, it's an organisation of 60,000 employees in total, and we take around sort of between 1,000 and 1,500. So it's still really big graduate employers. I guess the first thing is that in my experience of these two organisations now, both have been really good at identifying what skills the future workforce may need, as well as what are the kind of evergreen skills of today that we want our grads to have. And I think that's a really interesting sort of area to think about. And so it means that you can also evolve the offering that you make. So as an example, at KPMG, we had an apprenticeship route for coders. And the way in which AI is now developed, we don't need that anymore. So there was a real requirement for that sort of skill. We wanted to make sure that we were bringing people in to be able to train them, to be able to do that through an accredited route. That has evolved, and therefore so has the requirement. So really understanding what skills do you need that are the kind of core skills versus what are the new skills that we also might want to train for. There's something about speed, and there's sort of two parts to that. The first is actually just getting offers out. I'm sure that the civil service has got much better at that than it did when I was experiencing it. But at KPMG, once you'd done the graduate assessment, you would know within 48 hours. And there's all sorts of benefits to that, not the least for those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds in particular, where you want certainty of where you're going, what you're going to be paid, have you got a job or not, and sitting around waiting for offers, even if your preference is, say, the civil service. If you've got to wait 6 months to get that offer, then, you know, that's not great. So there's sort of speed of actually getting the decision out, but then also the speed with which people are trained within the organisation. So at NatWest, the average graduate scheme is 2 years, and at KPMG it differed, but almost everyone was working towards some form of qualification or accreditation, which brings me to my third point. I think that's a real advantage. If you're joining an organisation and you know at the end of your graduate stint you will have an accreditation or a qualification, it's, in KPMG, obvious, you're probably going to be some form of accountant. But if you're joining, say, I don't know, an HR stream, are you ensuring that those that are doing that track are going to have the highest possible Chartered Institute of Professional Development qualification they can possibly have, so that there's something there that keeps them in the organisation? So I think those three are probably ones that I would pull out. There are probably more, but they're the ones that spring to mind when I think about my experiences in all three of those organisations.
It's really interesting, and one of the things I've been struck by in this work, but also more broadly in that kind of comparison between different sectors, is how, and it may be a sort of luxury of the private sector, if you like, but there's almost more of an intent around the development of individuals and to levels that would actually be quite countercultural in the civil service. So, you know, by 27 you should be doing this, by 35 you should be doing that. Obviously that's by 45 you should be in a senior management position, whatever. And that's, you know, that's obviously got there are pros and cons to that. I mean, first, does that reflect your experience? Second, do you think there's a benefit to being much more kind of directive with where we'd expect people to be?
I personally think there's a huge benefit to making it clear to people that part of the deal when you're coming in through a graduate route is that you will be part of the leadership of the future of the organisation should you choose to want to stay in it. And obviously people are thinking very differently today about their careers than they perhaps were 20 years ago. Most people I speak to can't imagine that they would commit their entire career to working at NatWest or KPMG, but making a very clear and deliberate compact, if you like, with the grads that if that is what you want, these are the expectations that you can expect in terms of progression, promotion, and where we would expect you to be in the organisation has certainly been something that I think has been successful. Yeah.
Interesting, thank you. And Robert, what does the FDA hear from fast streamers about what they want to change? I can guess one of the topics. But,
yeah, well,
but you start with that and then.
I wouldn't be fulfilling my role as a Northern trade unionist if I didn't talk about pay. And I think the feedback we hear from our members is pay is definitely the biggest change they want to see. But I just want to start by just highlighting that the civil service fast stream is already one of the most prestigious, competitive and fulfilling talent development programmes we have in the UK. It's regularly ranked as the UK's best graduate employer, and last year we saw a record 72,000 people apply to be on the fast stream. And that should give everyone in this room great hope and confidence that so many talented and gifted people, often young people, are drawn to a career in public service and taken on that mantle of improving our public services. But despite this recruitment success, the challenge that the fast stream faces lies in retention. It's not getting people through the door, it's getting them to stay, quite frankly. And I think this was highlighted in your report, Theodore, that you found that 36% of former fast streamers left the scheme early. And our own survey of fast streamers shows that the overwhelming reason for this is pay, because it lags behind the pay of equivalent grades in the Cabinet Office, namely higher executive officers and senior executive officers. And pay parity is something that our members really want to see, and the strength of feeling on this is so immense that our members were on the precipice of taking strike action in 2023 to achieve that. We managed to avoid that industrial action by securing some significant pay rises, the introduction of the London Living Allowance, but we're still a long way away from pay parity. And it's not just a cause that we champion as the FDA, it forms part of the IFG report's recommendations, and it aligns with other recommendations that are made by other think tanks that have published reports on fast stream reform. And I think it is also just worth just going through the journey of a fast streamer, which is they apply often as university students. They see the starting salary of 31,000 or 35,000 if they're based in London, and they think, yeah, that's a decent salary. Then when they're on the scheme, they see that they're working with HEOs, SEOs, doing equivalent work, but they're paid a lot less. And that's when the dissatisfaction sets in. And it is, again, shown in the IFG's report. I think it's on page 26, figure 16. You can see that the perception of applicants of the pay and benefits is pretty good. And then when you look at current fast streamers and former fast streamers, it drops off massively, far more than any of the other things that were surveyed. And then fast streamers are put in this position where they have to calculate, am I better off staying on the scheme with a lower salary but more certainty of getting to that grade 7 position, or should I leave the fast stream, trade off that certainty for an immediate pay rise and basically try and make my own way to grade 7 within a similar time frame? And that calculation might sound short-sighted and tawdry, but it's a very real calculation that people face, especially early on in their career, especially if they live in London, they may be from a working class background, don't have family wealth that they can rely on, and over half their salary is going on rent, tax and student loan repayments. And this situation is bad for the fast stream because your most gifted and talented participants might leave the scheme early, but it also has disadvantages for fast streamers because not all of them will make it to grade 7 in the time they anticipate if they leave the scheme early. They'll miss out on the learning and development that's offered through the fast stream, and they'll also face more friction moving between roles. So the fast stream has the placements and the postings, and people rotate quite neatly. Whereas if you were trying to replicate that within the mainstream civil service, you have to go through job applications, interviews. And so you might get to grade 7, but you might find you've got a far narrower range of work experiences than had you stayed on the scheme. So pay parity is definitely the biggest change that our members want to see. I think it would improve retention, and also it would help recruitment and retention amongst those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds.
Cool, thank you.
Alex, can I make a reflection about that? So that's obviously part of the challenge that many organisations, civil service as well as private sector organisations have, and one of the ways around that, it'd be interesting to know if the civil service has ever explored this, is to have progression within a scheme. So your pay is X in year 1, X in year 2, X in year 3, X in year 4, and you see progression at the same level as your research was showing, which is that you're then keeping pace with that HEO, SEO population. So you're never earning less than an equivalent, but you're also feeling as though you're getting progression in role. So it's not all about, I must be promoted in order to earn more. You value then the experience that you have on a scheme for a longer period. And I've always wondered why. I mean, it's obviously much, much more important a topic now because of, you know, the sort of the changing macroeconomic environment. But that feels to me like quite a straightforward fix. I'm sure Sonia will tell me why it isn't.
I was going to say this.
But that seems to me to be such a straightforward way to address this big concern, which is a perfectly legitimate one for all the reasons you're saying.
Yeah. And there is an element of that, isn't there, Sonia? I'll come to you in a second. There's an element of that in the scheme already, but do you think the fast stream could do more on that sort of sense of progression? Sonia first and then Robert.
Yeah, I think it's a really valid point, and most certainly, I think the biggest issue was around pay parity when I was head of the scheme. I am really proud that I did deliver the pay business case, which was a 2-year pay deal, including the London location allowance. And I am pleased to say that there is pay progression within the scheme. So the fast stream is either a 3 or 4 year programme, and upon the first kind of in-scheme assessment, if you like, there is an element of pay progression, but there's always more that can be done. What we did consider very carefully, as I know other graduate employers do, is what is the cost of the total offer? And we've already heard that, you know, the range of experiences, which is very unique to the fast stream actually in terms of moving and shifting from department, is a valuable experience in terms of rotations, but the professional qualifications, and I think you make a really good point around accreditations and certifications. And with the professions agenda in the civil service, we now ask every fast streamer to align with a profession which has defined skills and standards and long-term CPD, which again is hopefully every fast streamer will leave the scheme with an accreditation, a qualification, a certification that will be transferable hopefully between professions and external to the civil service as well.
Thanks, Sonia. Robert, did you want to say anything briefly on the sort of progression point?
No, the fast stream does have spot rates, so as you your pay does increase, but it never really matches or comes close to the HO and SCO pay bands.
Yeah, thank you. Theodore, do you want to give one of the interesting things about this report, fourth plug, is that we, as you mentioned, we did this survey and we did some focus groups of fast streamers, potential fast streamers, former fast streamers. Do you want to give us a bit of more of a flavour of that? So particularly, for example, and I'm interested in Sonia's view on it, but there was strong feeling about the variable quality of posting, which you talked briefly about. Give us a bit more of a sense of what came out from those discussions.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think there was a sense like, so one of the things that really stuck with me is that in multiple individual focus groups we sort of had people like refer to the sort of the situation with posting as some sort of Russian roulette. So there is a sense in which there are genuine postings where you get the opportunity to sort of be stretched and you get to develop those leadership skills. And then there was a feeling from a lot of people that some of the jobs that they ended up doing whilst on the scheme were basically plugging resourcing gaps in various bits of various departments. And this was particularly true about former fast streamers. It seems there's a sense that may be changing, but it's obviously too early to tell what the impact of those reforms might be. There are a lot of stories of sort of quite variable line management, and there's been, frankly, like quite a lot of attempts to sort of align all line managers for activity managers for fast streamers to sort of civil service line management standards. There's, I think, one of the big challenges from all of that, and something that has come up in a lot of the people in our focus groups have told us, is a lot of it is downstream of a sense that the purpose of the scheme is not very clear, and this is something that fast streamers would bring up unprompted themselves, which I found quite interesting. So there was a sense that sometimes this is just the main route into the civil service, and this is just what graduates would do. If you're interested in public service, you apply to the fast stream, and if you don't get in, then that's basically it, which I think is which seems to be a shame. A lot of people sort of did express to us that they didn't realise that there were other ways to get into the civil service, so that's quite concerning. Like, there are a lot of applications going through the fast stream, 70,000 of them, which is great, but then the problem is you have a lot of people who are really motivated to be in public service, but then don't realise that there are many other ways to sort of manage, to break into public service and then to manage their careers onward. So I think that's one of those things, but it did seem like sometimes the sort of thing that that fast streamers were sold, they were like, the reality of the experience of being on the scheme doesn't really match up to some of the expectations that they had. So that misalignment, I think, was one of the strong feelings that you got from a lot of the research work that we did.
Thanks, Theodore. I'll come to the room for questions in a minute. I'll do a few online first. The top ranked one is probably for you, Rachel, I think. Well, we've got two. Surprisingly large number of questions from Anonymous, perhaps unsurprisingly. Rachel, do you think it is still seen as a, quote, elite scheme by private sector businesses? And then a very similar one for Rachel, what made her, others at KPMG prize the fast stream? What about it as an assessment route or programme makes them better than other civil servants or other grad schemes?
And what was the first question? Sorry,
So do you think it's still seen as an elite scheme by private sector businesses?
Did I use the word elite? I'm sorry if I did. Prestigious. Yes, in short, I do. For all of the reasons that actually, Robert, you were saying, still ranking as the top graduate scheme as per the Times rankings. You know, there's definitely still, certainly the perception there that it is a top quality scheme that produces excellent recruits. Whether perception is matching up to reality, I think is a slightly different question, and I can probably comment on that a little bit less. And also, we certainly from my experience, we have seen less movement into the private sector from the fast stream immediately after qualification. So what's quite interesting about the data that you've got is that although people aren't finishing the fast stream, they're staying in the civil service. So there's something intrinsic about people wanting to remain in the civil service rather than leave. Whereas I would say the challenge for both private sector employers I've worked for is to keep people. So how do you keep people once they've got a qualification or once they're trained, because they're very, very marketable in the wider market. So I don't know whether that's a sort of confidence thing or whether that is just an intrinsic kind of motivation about the type of work that you get to do in the civil service that you just don't get to do anywhere else. So that's the first thing on sort of prestige. You know, is it perceived as a top flight scheme? Absolutely. And then the second question was, what is it about the skills?
I've lost it here, but it was about, what it is about the nature of the civil service scheme that particularly in KPMG sort of made it stand out.
Yeah, so at KPMG, I guess with many of the consultancies, they have really, really big public sector practices. And what's really interesting is that you can often go and join a big consultancy without any experience of what the public sector and specifically what the civil service is like. So bringing that experience of how do things get done in the civil service, how are decisions made, what is policy making? You know, it's something that I think if you're a civil servant, you take for granted that everybody understands. Whereas actually, if you think about how policy is made, it is mostly a monopoly within the civil service in terms of the provision of advice to ministers and the way in which those decisions are made. There are obviously fantastic think tanks who are offering up their own researchers and their own advice and their own points of view, who have their own sort of policy capability. But really, that sort of policy analysis, development, execution is still really the preserve of the civil service. And to organisations who are contracting with the public sector, in the civil service specifically, that is a very highly prized skill.
Really interesting. Sonia, it's a question that could be for you or possibly Theodore. Have we got data on the quality of fast stream managers as opposed to activity managers or postings, as they have a huge impact? Sonia mentioned the fast stream team is equivalent in size to other grad schemes, but how does their quality compare? So in your time, Sonia, how did you focus on fast stream managers and kind of trying to enhance the quality of management?
Yeah, we actually flipped the delivery model. So we had a model when I first took a post whereby the central team, the activity managers, were responsible for kind of more of the day-to-day well-being, but also appraisal of fast streamers. And what we recognised is we really need to push accountability to the place where it best sits, and that is with those individuals in departments who are responsible for task allocation and experience and work with the fast streamers day to day. But we all also across the whole civil service were putting a huge focus on developing line manager capability. So I think the experience of line managers wasn't something that was unique to the fast stream per se, but something that the civil service and other organisations have been grappling with in terms of really developing and defining line manager capability, because I think that kind of rigour in terms of training eroded over time. I remember 20 years ago you might have been on a week's training to in terms of developing line manager skills, and that had gone up over time. So that model switched. That's hopefully the experience of current and certainly for future fast streamers. And then the central team are much more there to provide the wraparound offer, if you like. And I think you mentioned quality. Quality was certainly an issue that came up through the research that I carried out with the team, and through the Fast Stream 24 programme, we put a real focus on quality to ensure that the fast streamer experience was continually evolving. But what we really put the spotlight on and worked really closely with department and profession leads to ensure that they were really clear on the purpose of the fast stream, their commitments around improved quality, their commitment to provide quality postings, that meant that the roles were sufficiently stretching, and that was very much part of the reform programme.
Thanks. And Robert, what's the FDA take on quality management in the civil service, particularly management of fast streamers?
Oh, okay. Well, I think it depends. I mean, it varies, right?
Yeah.
I think there's obviously the management of fast streams is provided through FSET, and then there's the management they experience in their individual postings. I mean, I deal with FSET on quite a high level, and I've found them to be pretty conscientious and responsive. A lot of the concerns that we're talking about today, the FSET are aware of, and we're working with them on it. But with regards to the training that the fast streamers receive, because that was another point that was made, I think that the centralisation of the schemes, and now you have a situation where each scheme kind of marries up to a profession, and it comes with its own dedicated learning pathway. That is broadly a good thing, I think, but I think there have been instances where the learning quality varies. So, for example, people who previously, if you're on the economics pathway, there was an opportunity for you to do a master's degree in economics at some point. And my understanding now is that having it being centralised, that no longer exists. So I think some of the scheme-specific learning varies. With management, that is a concern that we hear, that fast streamers aren't given enough experience, or any experience really, in managing people, and then when they finish the scheme, they're made grade 7s, and they have to manage a team. But again, that's something that FSET are responding to, and they are now introducing modules on management, and they're looking at piloting management experience.
Oh, thank you.
That sparked a thought, Alex, sorry.
Go for it, and then I'll come to the
draws on something that Robert just said, as well as Sonia, and tracks back to the last question on what are the skills specifically that private sector organisations think the civil service fast stream produces. And one of them is excellent leadership skills. So it's quite interesting that this is a thing in the more recent cohorts that is lacking, but actually in another environment, i.e. in the private sector, it's definitely seen as something that produces brilliant leaders. So there's probably a bit of a lag on that, because you're generally going to the private sector after a longer period of time in the civil service. But there's something definitely to sort of be treasured there. I think bringing it back is important.
Civil service confidence as well, in its own kind of ability to develop people. I'll take 3 questions from the room. Who would like to ask a question? There'll be lots of fast streamers here, so you're not going to be reticent. I know fast streamers. I'll get to the man there in white.
Thanks. Yeah. Hi, I'm Nick. I work for DWP, running on a second year fast streamer. So you called it a graduate scheme quite a few times, but it's, I think 11 of the 17 pathways are open to current civil servants without a degree. And also you mentioned recruiting young people, but I'm pretty sure for the current cohort, the 2025 cohort, there was 11 40-year-olds who were recruited. I think the average age was about 27. So what are some of the implications of casting a wider net, good and bad, basically?
Yeah, really good point. Thank you. I'll take another one. At the front here.
Hi, I'm Maria. I'm actually on the local government graduate scheme, but I applied to the civil service as well. I think I have a question kind of comparing to two fast streams regarding autonomy on the job. So the civil service fast stream is 3 years, and you have the risk of relocation, moving to a different city, if you can speak a bit on the purpose of that. But also in terms of the quality of posting, not just in terms of what the posting offers you, but where exactly you are posted, and the fact that people can come into the scheme with a very, certain interest in social policy or education or defense, whatever it is, and end up in a department that doesn't really match their skills. Comparing to the local government graduate scheme, that's 2 years, and I found a lot more autonomy in terms from our graduate cohort in terms of where people can go. If you can talk a bit more on both the experience of fast streamers, but also what is the purpose of this perceived lack of autonomy.
Really interesting, thank you. And we need more interchange between civil service and local government generally. And at the back, Glenn, I think, sort of maroony red. Yeah, thanks.
Has there ever been any consideration with regards to building in greater flexibility in the scheme? So, for example, rather than having these 12-month postings, if they're not working well for the fast streamer, is there a consideration that perhaps after the 6th month mark they could move to a situation which is more aligned with their preferences for development and their skill set, for example?
Cool. Thank you. Postings used to be 6 months at the start for a period, but it didn't work very well in my view. But Theodore, do you want to start with that sort of autonomy, location, matching point? Because I know you have thoughts on this.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that. That's a really good question. I think on the relocation side of things, I think that's definitely, again, one of the things that came up is a lot of people are quite concerned about it. And obviously we captured the views of people who, despite those concerns, still chose to apply to the fast stream. And the concerns were particularly concentrated in sort of the applicants for current and former fast streamers who are not based in London. So there's still a big perception that the fast stream is in London, and if you don't want to move to London, that's not really an option for you. So there's some loss of talent that we suspect happens there. It's very hard to sort of gauge what it actually looks like. So in all fairness, the civil service is doing things to change that. So there's a goal to have 50% of postings by 2030, if I'm not mistaken, to be outside of London. So sort of to reflect the relocation of the civil service outside of London more broadly. There's also, in the current sort of advertising campaign for the fast stream recruitment, there's a bit more clarity, and I think the FSET team are sort of much more trying to be much clearer about the fact that the fast stream is not just London-based. There are a lot of postings outside of it. But I think the problem is still fundamentally, you might get moved to a place where you don't want to be. And there are obviously relocation restrictions in various situations where that might not happen once you're in the scheme. But I think that's a big disincentive for people to apply in the first place. So what we propose in our report is recently there have been some regional pilots that are introduced where you basically, if you opt into those pilots after you've gotten onto the scheme, you have the chance to sort of have it guaranteed that you'll have all of your postings in the same area. Everyone who we've spoken to who is on those pilots is quite happy with that, but this is again something that you only really find out after you've applied, so it still doesn't really, and they're not a permanent fixture of the scheme, so there's a chance that they might stop, the pilots might stop being offered. So what we propose is that should be a permanent feature of the scheme if the civil service is genuinely sort of committed to posting civil servants all across the country, then it should, and there are a lot of excellent civil service roles outside of London, then it should just commit to creating those kinds of regional talent pipelines from various regions in the country where people in the area know that they can stay in the area where they've lived their entire lives or where they might want to live, but still also sort of pursue the career that they want. And just very briefly on the autonomy over subject area, my own sort of initial hypothesis was that this would be something that a lot of people would bring up. Actually, a lot of people were very happy with the fact that they had sort of that variety in terms of subject areas, because one of the things they were looking for is like they knew they wanted to do something policy related, they knew they wanted to do public service, they knew they wanted to do whatever it was that they were doing on their particular stream, but they're not very clear on what particular policy area, what the concrete activity that they would want to do was going to be. So it really did help them that they had a variety of different experiences across a variety of different departments. So actually it seems like the rotation element and sort of having your career managed for you is a bit of a pull for a lot of people, but equally sometimes for some other categories of applicants it might be a disincentive, and that's when other things like the learning and development offer, pay and benefits, etc., have to sort of outweigh that the disadvantage that might constitute for some applicants.
Thank you. Rachel, Nick, I think it was, rightly picked us up on the fact that fast stream is not just a scheme for 22-year-olds fresh out of university. But interested to get your take on the consequence that has for the scheme, but also is that the same across sectors, or is fast stream unusual in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, if I have inadvertently caused offence calling it a grad scheme,
it was probably me.
Apologise. I think most schemes have broadened in scope, both in the civil service, in the wider public sector, and then in the private sector as well. I think that is about casting the net as wide as possible to get the best talent. In my experience, so that was definitely less the case when I was a new joiner to the civil service. I don't feel qualified enough to speak on whether or not that has been a net benefit to the civil service or not, but I would imagine, just sort of instinctively, yes, it is. But I think it's about being really clear when you're bringing people in what the pathway is, what their expectations are from the scheme itself, what you're bringing to the table at the point at which you're coming in, depending on whether or not you are coming in as a later joiner on the basis that you've had a very different career before and you now want to pivot into public service. Well, that's fantastic. So I think it's that sort of clarity of expectation that is really, really important, so that people understand why they're there.
Thank you.
But I would say, going back to the point, I don't know the stats exactly, but my hunch is that it is more apprentice, graduate focused and focused on those that are leaving university or education.
Yeah, that's right. Robert, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think Nick makes a really pertinent point, actually, and it's something that I'm always keen to emphasise, that the fast stream, while most people on it are graduates, I think it isn't a graduate scheme, it is a talent development programme. And that's important for the reason around pay parity, actually, because I went to Base Camp, which is the fast stream kind of induction events that are held for the new incoming cohort. And when I was there, I met someone who already had a career before they applied for the civil service, for the fast stream, a very good career, and they'd left that behind because they'd been accepted onto the diplomatic and development fast stream. I said, oh, well, why did you turn away from this really well-paid career? And he was, well, come on, how often do you get an opportunity to go and work in something like diplomacy and development? And that, on the one hand, that's really inspirational that people see public service as a vocation like that and are committed and want to do it. But also, you could only do that if you're in a position where you could afford to do that. Yeah. And, there are going to be people who are in their late 20s, early 30s, maybe in their 40s, who actually might want to go on the fast stream, but the pay just isn't enough for them. And so I think that's another reason why we need pay parity, especially to attract people from lower and socioeconomic backgrounds, which has been a priority for this government. And then the other point I was going to respond to, it was the question around relocation and lack of autonomy. And the feedback from our members is that relocation shouldn't be mandatory. It feels a little bit anachronistic given the Places for Growth agenda and the ambition to get 50% of fast streamers outside of London by 2030. At the moment, if you've got caring responsibilities or health conditions, or you're on one of the regional pilots, you can stay in a certain area. I think the regional pilots should be expanded and made permanent. I think they're a good thing. But also, there are some fast streamers who enjoy relocation and actually don't have any responsibilities or liabilities, and they want to move to London, for example, to go and work in private office, and they should have the opportunity to do that. So I think it's about choice. And the very, very final thing I'll say is on the lack of autonomy point, one of the other things we've encountered is that some people leave the scheme prematurely because they might be on a very niche scheme and they're not confident that they're going to be able to get a grade 7 role in that niche discipline or niche profession at the end of the scheme, and they might have to go into a grade 7 position in a different type of profession, and therefore they leave the scheme early so that they can stay in their chosen lane or specialism.
Thank you. Sonia, I'm slightly conscious of time and I want to get in a few quick-fire questions, but can you pick up that question about flexibility in a sort of 6-month waypoint and whether that's been considered in the past or should be in future?
Yeah, as you said, historically there were 6-month postings, and I think the evidence told us that just wasn't quite long enough in terms of being able to pick up and really get immersed into a role, deliver and gain the knowledge and skills required in that particular posting. So that that's quite some thoughts being given to that. But that said, there is an element of flexibility if something simply isn't working, and that's where the line managers and the FSET team will pick that up with individuals.
Brilliant, thank you. Admirably concise. You've allowed me to get a couple more in. Theodore, there's a popular question online, but let's keep all these answers short. Why is a fast streamer's early move to a more senior role in the civil service sometimes seen as a failure of the scheme rather than its intended success?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends what you think the scheme is for. Like, if the scheme is supposed to be sort of a very targeted program where you prepare future leaders of the civil service, and it's like a full-on journey throughout the entirety of the scheme, then to me, sort of people dropping off the scheme, it means that they haven't had the full journey, and it means that there's something about the offer on the fast stream that is just not enough to convince them to stay there, or it's usually about pay, it's about a bunch of other things, but I think that to me is some kind of warning sign that the scheme is not delivering as much as it could.
Yeah, I agree with that. Sonia, is there a need for more strategic planning around the number of fast streamers allocated to different professional schemes, considering not only current demand but also future workforce requirements? And Rachel's point about future skills as well, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess we talk about the size of the fast stream, should it be smaller? But ultimately, the numbers are dictated by the strategic workforce plan that is coordinated, essentially through Cabinet Office, but actually looking at the needs and wants of departments and professions. And I think that ebbs and flows over time. And something that is important to note is that the kind of exponential growth of the fast stream was in part due to the growth of the number of civil service professions and that professions under agenda under John Manzoni.
Brilliant, thank you. You're being very good with the shortness of answers, so we can get through some more. Robert, you mentioned this already briefly, but can the fast stream be used to promote more working class people to the top of the civil service?
Definitely.
Yeah. Amazing. I've never had people give answers like this. This is fantastic. And Rachel, I'm not sure you'll be able to do this in one word, but I've got an existential one for you to finish off on, but only because we go back a long way. Shouldn't everyone start at the bottom and work their way up? Does talent exist?
Big question.
Yeah.
Very big question. Should everyone start at the bottom of the civil service and work their way up?
Yeah.
No. I think that one of the things that I observe in businesses is the ability to bring people in at different levels at different times, give people different experiences, train people in different ways, and then celebrate if they want to go somewhere else and pass those skills on. And I think there is a mindset in that would be really valuable in the civil service, so that if you do choose to leave, you're not seen as a defector, a traitor, as someone who is sort of leaving the club never to return. It should be seen as a fantastic opportunity to develop different skills, to broaden networks, to understand a bit more about what happens outside of the civil service, and then hopefully bring that back. So no, I don't think that you need to start at the bottom and work your way to the top.
And does talent exist?
Does talent exist? I mean, that is a big question.
You don't have to answer that one.
I'm not quite sure where to start with it in the context of this conversation. Does everyone possess unique talents? Yes.
I think yes.
And then I think it's incumbent on both the individual and the employer to work at how to really kind of exploit those talents for the benefit of the individual and the employer.
Brilliant. Thank you.
I was-
Because you gave a one-word answer.
I was just going to say, no, as a Preston North End fan, I can assure you that sometimes talent doesn't exist.
Neither Alex nor
I was going to say, I have
football analogies,
I have
sorry.
nothing on that. There we go. But it is 7:01, so we're going to finish. It's time for those in the room to have a drink and those watching online to have a drink as well, if you've got one. The event live stream will be available shortly to watch on our website and on YouTube. And check out that website not only for Theodore's report, but other events and reports, as well as our regular podcast. We've got a busy week this week, discussion about NHS technology, event on the government's plans for digital ID coming up. John Swinney, First Minister of Scotland, is here. And on Thursday, our reaction to Friday, I think the event is, to the second module of the COVID inquiry, which is coming out this week. Huge thanks to everybody who came along. Particular thanks to the panel, to Theodore for the report, but for all of you for participating. Really appreciate that. And have a good evening.